My name's Carol, and I'm 72 years old. For most of the last 7 years, silence has been my closest companion. It wasn't always unwelcome. After Richard passed, I found comfort in the hush of the house. No more clattering dishes, no more television humming in the background, no more of his gentle whistling from the den. In those early months, quiet felt merciful, like a blanket I could pull over my head. But somewhere along the way, it changed its texture. It grew heavier, thicker, like humidity before a storm. My mornings unfold the same way they have for years. I wake before the alarm, usually around 6:30. The house is still half dark, and I take my time getting out of bed, letting my joints remember how to be useful. By 7, the kettle is whistling. 2 spoonfuls of honey swirl into my tea. Always the same brand, always the same cup, the one with the faded violet on the side. I drink it by the kitchen window while reading the Charlotte Sentinel. I skim the obituaries first, habit, I suppose, and then the crossword. The paper folds neatly when I'm done, no creases out of place. After that, I water the plants on the windowsill, the jade that somehow survived my inconsistent care, and the stubborn orchid that has refused to bloom for 5 years, but still refuses to die. I tidy the kitchen, even when it doesn't need tidying, and sometimes I dust picture frames that have no new fingerprints. From the outside, it all looks purposeful, healthy even. "You're so strong, Carol," people say. I smile and nod, though I've come to learn that strength and numbness can look identical from a distance. I'm not unhappy, not exactly, but I'm not alive either. I exist between the two, still moving, still breathing, but dimmed somehow. A few weeks ago, the kitchen faucet began to leak. At first, it was just a faint drip I could ignore, but eventually, the rhythm of it, drip, 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 became impossible to tune out. I tried fixing it myself after watching a few videos online, but after a half hour on my knees with a wrench that refused to cooperate, I gave up. The drip turned into a trickle, as if mocking me. So I called the local plumbing service. The woman on the phone was pleasant and said she could send someone between 8 and noon. I expected an older man, maybe in his 60s, with calloused hands and a gray beard. That felt appropriate somehow. Comforting. Instead, when the truck pulled up at 9:30 the next morning, out stepped someone entirely different. He was young. Well, young to me anyway. Maybe late 30s or early 40s. Tall and lean, with a baseball cap pushed back on a head of sun-streaked brown hair. His smile came easily, and when I opened the door, he looked me straight in the eye as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," he said. "You must be Carol. I'm Tyler." There was no trace of hurry or distraction in his voice, and I was surprised by how disarming that felt. Most people my age are looked at the way one glances at an old photograph. Fondly, maybe, but from a distance. Tyler's gaze wasn't like that. He was fully present. I led him into the kitchen and gestured at the faucet. "It's developed a personality," I said, trying for humor. "One that doesn't listen." He chuckled softly and crouched down to look under the sink. "They do that sometimes. Let's see what we're working with." For a few minutes, there was just the sound of tools clinking. I stood there awkwardly, unsure whether to hover or disappear. "You don't have to stand guard," he said without looking up. "Most folks just point me to the leak and vanish." I smiled faintly. "Well, I like to supervise. Old habits." He turned his head slightly, eyes amused. "Supervision's good. Makes me feel like I've got company." Something about the way he said it, lighthearted but genuine, made me pause. Company. I hadn't thought of myself as company for anyone in a long time. When he stood to test the faucet, his eyes caught the photograph on the counter. Richard and I, taken 40 years ago at a state park. He was holding 2 ice cream cones and grinning like a schoolboy. My hair was long and windblown. We looked happy in that careless way you can only be when you think time is infinite. Nice picture, Tyler said. You two look like you were having a good time. We were, I said softly. We used to take road trips just to get lost. Richard believed a map took all the fun out of it. He laughed quietly. Sounds like my grandma. She used to say, if you always know where you're going, you'll miss all the surprises. That made me smile. He turned back to his work, and I noticed his hands. Steady, sure, but gentle somehow. When he finished, the dripping had stopped. He rinsed his hands at the sink, glancing toward the window where my old paintbrushes sat in a jar, half forgotten. You paint? He asked. I used to, I said automatically. Watercolors mostly. Haven't picked them up in years. Why not? I hesitated, looking at the dusty brushes. Guess I just forgot how. He nodded, as if he understood perfectly. My grandma used to say silence can be comforting, but if you're not careful, it gets real loud. The words caught me off guard. Silence. Loud. I knew exactly what he meant. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I offered him tea, mostly because it felt polite, but he accepted. And somehow we ended up sitting at the kitchen table like old friends. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about the town, about how summer seemed hotter now, about music and gardens and how fast time moves once you stop counting it. At some point, I found myself saying, when Richard died, it felt like the music stopped. The days still played on, but they had no melody. He didn't fidget or look away. He just listened, really listened. After a quiet pause, he said softly, Do you ever miss being seen? The question landed somewhere deep inside me. I opened my mouth, but for a moment nothing came out. Then, finally, yes, I think I do. He looked right at me, calm and certain, and said, I see you, Carol. It shouldn't have undone me, but it did. There was something in the way he said it, without sentiment, without pity, that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long gray stretch. When he left, I walked him to the door, and for the first time in a long while, I felt present in my own home. The silence that greeted me after he was gone wasn't the same as before. It didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a pause, an inhale before something new. Tyler started showing up again a week later, saying the company wanted to make sure the repair held. I knew that was nonsense, but I didn't call him out on it. Truthfully, I was glad to see him. He stood in the doorway, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of peaches. My mom's tree went wild this year, he said. Thought you might help me keep them from going bad. We ended up in the backyard under the maple tree, where the air was warm and heavy with the scent of cut grass. The branches above us caught the light like green glass. I sliced the peaches while he talked about his grandmother, about how she'd raised him after his parents divorced, about the way she used to hum when she cooked. He spoke easily, with that same quiet confidence that never felt performative. After that, he started coming by regularly, sometimes to check a squeaky door hinge, sometimes with a slice of pie, or a story about some odd customer he'd met. I told myself it was just neighborly kindness, but I began to anticipate the sound of his truck in the driveway. The rhythm of my week subtly rearranged itself around his visits. One afternoon, we walked to the park down the street. The trees were just starting to show the faintest edge of gold, that shy hint of autumn. As we strolled, he didn't offer me his arm the way younger people sometimes do when they think they're helping. He just walked beside me, neither rushing ahead nor lagging behind. I hadn't realized until then how much I appreciated that. Respect sometimes looks like letting someone keep their balance. But later that night, the guilt hit me. I was brushing my hair before bed when I caught my reflection in the mirror. Silver hair, soft wrinkles, eyes that looked uncertain. "What are you doing, Carol?" I muttered. It wasn't really a question. It was Richard's voice in my head, the voice of the life I'd already lived. The next morning, I tried to convince myself to stop answering Tyler's calls, but I couldn't, because when he spoke to me, I felt awake in a way I hadn't been in years. It was terrifying and exhilarating at once. A few days later, while tidying the hallway closet, I found an old wooden box tucked behind winter coats. Inside were my watercolor brushes, still wrapped in tissue, and a small tin of paints so faded they looked like relics. I carried them to the kitchen table and unwrapped each brush. They smelled faintly of dust and linseed oil. For a long while, I just sat there. Then I filled a cup with water, dipped a brush, and touched it to paper. The color bloomed softly and perfectly, but it was beautiful. I could almost feel Richard watching, proud but not possessive. It wasn't betrayal. It was something else. It was returning. The next time Tyler came by, he noticed the paints immediately. "You started again," he said, his smile slow and genuine. "I did," I said, a little shyly. It felt strange at first, like remembering a song I hadn't heard in decades. He nodded. "Funny thing about songs, they don't disappear. They just wait for you to hum them again." We sat under the maple tree that evening, the air turning cool around us. I told him how I'd stopped imagining the future after Richard died, how I'd convinced myself there was no point in making plans when so much had already been lived. "You ever think," he said, watching the leaves overhead, "that maybe the future's been waiting for you to notice it again?" His words were gentle, but they found their way deep into me. For the first time in years, I caught myself wondering about what might still come instead of what had already gone. Over the next few weeks, my days changed in small ways. I started taking morning walks, just short ones. I began eating better, not because I feared growing old, but because I wanted to feel what energy felt like again. I even put on lipstick one afternoon, just because it made me smile. Then one late afternoon, something shifted. We were sitting under the maple tree again. The sky was glowing with the last light of day, cicadas singing somewhere unseen. Tyler was telling a story about fixing a porch swing for an elderly couple, and as he spoke, his arm brushed against mine. It was a simple touch, but the warmth of it rippled through me. He didn't move away. He just turned his hand slightly until his fingers rested near mine, not quite holding, just there, asking without asking. For a long while, neither of us said a word. Then he took a breath and said very softly, "I want to kiss you, Carol, but only if that's what you want too." My heart was steady, surprisingly steady. I looked at him and saw not the years between us, but the honesty in his face. "I think," I whispered, "it's been waiting for that." When he leaned in, the kiss was quiet, deliberate. No rush, no spark meant to dazzle, just a gentle meeting of trust and presence. It wasn't about filling the space Richard left. It was remembering that space could still hold warmth. Afterward, we sat there in comfortable silence. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and something sweet, maybe peaches, maybe memory. The next morning I woke early and made tea as usual, but the light seemed different somehow, softer yet brighter. I picked up the phone and texted Tyler, not because I needed him to fix anything, but because I wanted to tell him about the way the sunrise hit the maple leaves, or maybe just because I wanted to say good morning. It's strange rediscovering the rhythm of connection. I didn't lose Richard by finding it again. If anything, I think he'd be relieved. He'd always said I saw beauty in everything. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how to look. Now, I look again. I still have my routines, my tea, my paper, my plants, but they feel different now. There's anticipation in them, like the first notes of a song you love. Tyler reminded me that love doesn't retire. It doesn't have an expiration date. It shows up when it's ready.
And most of all, life doesn't end when the house gets quiet. Sometimes that's when it really begins.